Inflation is one of the most discussed economic topics today, often mentioned alongside unemployment as a major challenge for economies worldwide. But what exactly is inflation? While many people think they know, the concept is more complex than it seems. At its core, inflation refers to a sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services, not just a rise in the price of a few items. This means that over time, the purchasing power of money decreases. A single unit of currency buys less than before. Economists like G. Ackley describe inflation as a persistent and appreciable rise in average prices. It's important to note that inflation is about rising prices, not just high prices. Measuring inflation involves tracking the average price changes of a broad basket of goods and services over time, distinguishing it from short-term price fluctuation. This ongoing rise in prices creates a state of economic imbalance, making inflation a recurring and sometimes confusing phenomenon. Inflation doesn't always look the same. Economists classify it in several ways depending on its causes, speed, and government response. Based on causes, we see currency inflation from printing more money, credit inflation from excessive bank lending, deficit-induced inflation when government spending outpaces revenue, demand pull inflation when demand outstrips supply, and cost push inflation when production costs rise. Speed of inflation also matters. Creeping or mild inflation is slow and often considered manageable, walking inflation is moderate but riskier, while galloping and hyperinflation are rapid and can devastate economies. Government actions can suppress or reveal inflation, price controls may hide inflation temporarily, but once lifted, prices can surge. Understanding these types helps policymakers craft better responses and helps us grasp why inflation can be both a slow burn or a sudden crisis. Roots of inflation are varied and often intertwined. Demand pull inflation arises when aggregate demand in an economy exceeds aggregate supply. Think of too much money chasing too few goods. This can be triggered by increased consumer spending, government expenditure, or surge in exports. Monetarists argue that inflation is always a monetary phenomenon, driven by an expanding money supply. On the other hand, cost-push inflation stems from rising production costs, such as higher wages or raw material prices. These costs are often passed on to consumers, leading to a wage price spiral. External shocks like rising oil prices or supply chain disruptions can also push costs up. Sometimes inflation is imported from abroad or it's fueled by fiscal policies like higher taxes. In reality, inflation usually results from a combination of these factors, making it a complex challenge for any economy. Inflation impacts everyone but not equally. Some people benefit while others lose out. Borrowers often gain because they repay loans with money that's worth less, while lenders and those on fixed incomes like bondholders or pensioners see their purchasing power erode. Investors in shares may profit if company earnings rise with prices, but wage earners and salaried workers often struggle to keep up, as wage increases typically lag behind inflation. Inflation also affects economic growth. Mild inflation can encourage investment and production, but high or unpredictable inflation creates uncertainty, discouraging long-term investments and savings. In extreme cases like Germany's hyperinflation in the 1920s, the economy can be devastated. Money loses its value so quickly that people use it for fuel or toys instead of purchases. Ultimately, while a little inflation can stimulate growth, runaway inflation is a public enemy, undermining trust in the economy and harming society as a whole.